Mr. Madam Speaker, we think that in a society, in a democratic society, we think that the only reason why a government exists is not for like making policies or just simply existing there for its existence itself. We think that the fundamental reason why a government exists in every single society itself is for the protection and sake of our citizens. We think that when it comes to government, the main thing that we have to think about are its citizens, their lives, promoting the quality of those lives, so on and so forth. But right now in the status quo, we see a crisis within Japan. We see cases where citizens, more specifically reporters, went to the IS, and there's a situation where one's dead, violently killed by the IS, and one's in a situation where he's harshly threatened to the extent of death. We clearly see a situation where the government is facing threats by terrorist groups of the lives of their citizens. We think that in this case, the answer for a government to act in this case is quite clear. We think that through opposition, through the government's case, we're going to prove to you why it's absolutely necessary and something fundamental to do for a government to act and negotiate and save these people.
Sir.
Thank you, sir. We're also going to prove to you why also better for other practical reasons as well within the status quo, and we will elaborate this through our 3 arguments. So what are some 3 arguments? I'm going to give you 2 arguments today as Prime Minister. First of all, why the government has the necessity and the legitimacy to go in and negotiate with those terrorists. Secondly, why our policy will be better for international relations. And lastly, how this affects the political threshold. But before we move on to these arguments, let's go over the model that we'd like to state here today. First of all, we believe that in this case, what we're going to do is first, the Japanese government will negotiate with the terrorist group, the IS, and save their citizens in this situation.
Sorry.
Secondly, after that happens, we're going to ban all activities whatsoever of going into the IS, going into these terrorist groups, and acting in such activities. And thirdly, we're going to also increase security control, increase information about the harms of these terrorist groups beforehand, before its citizens make any of these actions. Therefore, when they make these decisions, it's all about informed consent, so on and so forth. And also, we'd like to mention to you that we believe that these debates mainly and specifically about the actions of the Japanese government itself. We think that that's the contextualization we have to focus on within today's debate. So now, moving on with that said, let's move on to the first argument about why the government has the necessity and legitimacy to negotiate. We're going to divide this argument. Thank you, sir. We're going to divide this argument into 2 subpoints, which is first of all, why a certain country or why a certain government has the duty to protect its citizens, and secondly, why it has the responsibility to follow the political will existing in the status quo. Thank you, sir. So moving on to our first subpoint about why it has the duty to protect their citizens. As we told you in our introduction, we think that one of the fundamental purposes why a government exists in the first place is because of its citizens, to protect its citizens. We think that when a government was created, thank you, sir, we think that when the government was created, it was based on a social contract between the government and the citizens, where they made a contract in which the citizens trust the government, give them certain authorities to rule a certain country, and at the same time, the government gives them protections, the government gives them duties, and the government gives them privileges.
More information, sir.
This is a contract that we see in the status quo, and the exact reason why a certain government has the duty to save its citizens. Not only that, more specifically, we think that when it comes to these cases, when it comes to a certain government, we think that every policy that a government does, every domestic step that a government takes, has to be under the premise that it's for the sake of the citizens. For example, let's take the examples of welfare or healthcare. If we don't do such policies, in an economic level, it may be extremely, extremely beneficial, bringing much more profit, so on and so forth. But the reason why we have these such welfare and healthcare policies, even by sacrificing our economic benefits, is because it's for the sake of our citizens, because for the promotion of the betterment of our citizens. In this case, we can conclude that every single action that a certain government does has to be under the premise for the sake of citizens. Well, then why is this? Thank you, sir. Why is this so relevant with this debate? We think that in the current status quo, the simple status of the government not negotiating with terrorists whatsoever is harming the rights of the citizens. We clearly see in the status quo that one person's already dead. We already have our citizens harmed. But more importantly, we think that another person is yet to be harmed, but we can still have a chance of saving it. Before we move on, yes, sir.
If negotiating with terrorists and saving the lives of its people is such a fundamental responsibility of the government, why would you initiate this policy only with the assumption that the people, the majority, agree to it?
First of all, we think that the reason why that's so important in this case is because of our political will. And secondly, we're not saying that we need the assumption in order to do this. We're also going to prove to you why, without the assumption, already still exists, already such political will still exists in the status quo. Thus, it's still fundamentally right to do certain policy. We don't think that we're not able to do this because we have this specific word called given a majority within the non-negotiable. We think that without that wording, even still in the status quo, it's still possible, which we will elaborate in our second subpoint of our first argument. But continuing on with the first argument, as we told you previously, we think that the main reason why government exists is in order to save their citizens, and we think that the current stance to simply not negotiate with terrorists at all is going against that stance. We think that we have a chance, we have an opportunity, and we have the capability of saving these citizens. Then we ask the opposition, why not save these people? We think that the government simply just not trying to save these citizens, just simply letting them die. They already let one die already, but letting another one die again is not something that we can do when we have the fundamental principle of saving our citizens. But more importantly, let's move on to the second subpoint about listening and respecting the will. Now, we don't think that the only reason why we're doing this motion is not because we're assuming that there's a given political majority, but we want to say that the political majority already exists within the status quo. We see most of Japanese citizens doing things like I am Kenji, who's the reporter who's currently in hostage by the IS. We already see such political movement, such political will of the citizens willing and wanting to save these people. We think that in this case, a government is also about representation, about representing what the citizens think about the government, about the policies, about the directions that the government does. In this case, we think that a majority already exists, and we have to respect this majority in order to promote the representation aspect of a government existing, especially within a democratic society like Japan. But moving on to our second argument, we also like to talk about international relations, how this will actually not affect international relations at all. Now, we think that one of the major contention points the opposition is going to bring up to the table today is about international relations, that if we negotiate with a country, especially like IS, it's going to be harmful to Japan and whatnot. But we think that is absolutely not true. Why is that? Because we think that when considering the characteristics that Japan has within the status quo, it's not something that any other country can simply give up because they negotiate and try to save their citizens. We think that, first of all, Japan's a country that has such a huge economy, third largest within the world, which makes it one of the largest trade partners within any single country around the globe, making it something that's not simply something that's able to be given up just like that. But more importantly, we also think that the socioeconomic status of Japan itself within the country is very high, very respected by other countries, something that's a key fundament to all domestic relations and all international relations as well. And that's why we strongly believe that when we consider this cost and benefit analysis of other countries that react to Japan, we think that this is simply not possible, and for these reasons, we're more than proud to propose an initiative. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, when you saw the Prime Minister, you could see he was very intimidated by our very critical POI that we gave, because he tried to talk about a lot of things, about how there was a majority political will, and they're going to assume this debate as if that political will exists. But at the same time, they have a tension in their own principality, where the role of a government is such a fundamental right in saving these people that it should be done with any such cost and measures. But at the same time, they assume that political will exist. We think this actually brings a tension regarding their own principality and regarding their own idea and argument, because that means that if there wasn't a political will, they wouldn't have done it in the first place. This weakens their entire stance from the get-go of this debate. But apart from that, we still think that the government, especially the Prime Minister, fails to understand the nature of this debate in the first place. Now, let us first analyze the status quo, unlike what the Prime Minister failed to do so. The status quo is that ISIS in the current status quo is a very weak state of nature, that it is still not a standing, strong army. So within a few weeks, Iraq is also going to attack by professionally trained US officials, and that will actually bring ISIS down. But the problem is, when nations like Japan, as they said, heavily economically prosperous nation, funds $2 billion into this nation to buy more weapons, we don't think that this is helping any at all. We think that the responsibility of Japan as a part of international society still stands, and their role, for example, saving the people, cannot stand, especially in a state of war, which is a very unique characterization, a unique situation that they cannot realize. But secondly, they also didn't read the reviews, because I know that this, guys who are making this motion didn't understand, but just today in the morning, the last individual, the last hostage, was killed just this morning. So you gotta read the news. So the entire status quo that they're analyzing does not stand. So therefore, practically, there's no reason that we have to make this debate in the first place. But let's assume, for the sake of the final debate, that let's engage in the practicality of this debate, where Japan does negotiate with terrorists in various other matters. We don't think that first time the government's responsibility also stands here, right? Because first, as I told you in my introduction, then why do you leave it to public referendum? It's a very, very big tension in the first place. But secondly, even if that is the case, we think your action actually harms other people in other nations with their innocent civilians in the numbers of tens and hundreds. because you pay $2 billion for that with other kinds of mechanisms, you're going to allow those terrorists to kill more and more people. The reason why the example they gave, which was welfare, still doesn't stand. Because welfare means that you're just actually having a mutual interest by investing your own wealth. But in this case, it's not investing or mutual interest. It is about sacrificing tens and hundreds of other people in other nations, or maybe your citizens. Because in this case, you're going to be able to sacrifice their own people. And thirdly, about their policy. They told you about this policy about how informed consent people will be only ones going in. You think that they didn't know that this kind of risk was going to be in their first place? These journalists, the two who have been killed just this morning, they knew this in the first place. So therefore, the policy simply doesn't change anything. We think this is a policy on ineffectiveness and also very irresponsible for the Japanese government to do so. But leaving all that aside, we still think that we take this big because of my excellent two arguments. First hand, I'll tell you why principally negotiation with terrorists is simply not acceptable. First hand, who are the terrorists in ISIS which has not been analyzed, which is a critical point that should have been done by the Prime Minister. We think that ISIS is a radical Muslim group with established organization of arms. Their goal is to destroy the Western society, the Western communities, and the entire world dominated by the Muslim societies. So, what you have to do is that they're not going to stop until their goal, which is to destroy the Western societies and dominate Muslim goals, is going to be accomplished. They're going to keep attacking, keep terrorizing the people. What is the problem here? Because bearing this in mind, bearing these characteristics of terrorists in mind, then the negotiation of terrorists in the status quo is principally not acceptable in any other debate.
Sir?
Because first hand, we said, wait a moment, ma'am, because this will actually enable these terrorists to make further other programs that will harm the people until they're distinguished and also taken down. But for that, with $2 billion more for these ISIS, they're going to kill more and more people with more harms and more cost to be done to save and take down the ISIS in the first place. Yes, ma'am.
Japan is not a part of that Western society that ISIS targets.
Actually, it is. First time, the goal of ISIS isn't just to take down America. It wants the entire world fulfilled and consumed with the Muslim ideologies in the first place. So that is factually not true. Secondly, even if that is the case, if United States of America and its own allies, which makes the Japanese economy grow in the first place, because Japan is can't self-sustain, right? It's just an island nation. So if its reputation cannot sustain itself as a part of an international society, then we think your stance cannot stand. So the only response, or kind of the idea, the excuse that came out from the Prime Minister, is that Japan is rich. But rich does not mean that you're respected, ladies and gentlemen. We think there's a whole new sphere where you're simply just saying that Japan is an economically prosperous nation, so you can do whatever you want. In that case, US should be doing whatever they want. But they kind of do, but they still get, criticized a lot. So as Japanese government, we still shouldn't do it and follow the criticism parts and negative parts of society. We have to be, as a part of an international society, be responsible members. But second,
So?
we think that, no ma'am, I already took one. I think in this debate, is that especially the state of war is quite different under the analogy that you're giving. But the analogy that you gave was a normal situation where welfare can be done, where everybody's prosperous and happy. But especially as they characterize in this state, where ISIS is a very, very bad nation, very violent in nature, within warfare as an international threat, and it's also a threat to the Japanese government, to us, but also to our citizens who, under their consent, also are going to go into that nation as a reporters and a journalist. Within those harms will be more targeted to Japanese people, which increases the risk and also the nationality that you try to fight for about the security of the nation. So therefore, we think that in this case, we have to push the principality of not negotiating with terrorists at any cost. But secondly, my second argument is about how foreign affairs should be carried out by the Japanese government. Now, unlike the irresponsible Prime Minister saying that just because rich, I can do whatever I want, which is a very, very bad argument. But let us see what Japan has as in its current reputation in international society. Right now, Japan is a heavy donor of the United Nations. It's one of the nations who support heavily the United Nations with good reputation. We think this has been done by Japanese government, which is this debate, right? Because we think that this reputation encouraged nations to think Japan in a positive manner. That's the reason why the Japanese economy was able to prosper, because other nations could trust Japan in this situation. But the problem is this. Let's assume right now a situation that in the status quo that has not been mentioned by the Prime Minister. The status quo is this, that the trade-off that the terrorist was requiring was actually a terrorist woman who terrorizes Jordan, not Japan. In other words, they want to trade a Japanese citizen with a terrorist who terrorized Jordan. In this case, if Japanese government simply made a request and just trade this individually, then what happens? You're violating the rights of Jordan. The Jordan people who had to die in the numbers of hundreds, ladies and gentlemen. And you don't call that foreign affairs, and you don't call that reputation at the end of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, money is not the matter. It's about the life. And the responsibility of Japanese government is also important, means that the responsibility of the government in Jordan's government is also as well as important. You got to respect that, and I think that international society peace only can happen when you respect other people, not just because you're rich. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's come back to the motion apart from the fire and brimstone speech of the previous speaker. Let's come back to the motion, how the motion clearly states as the status quo. The first part of the motion says that this House, as the Japanese government, and what is this Japanese government, ladies and gentlemen? Japanese government is a sovereign government with both right and responsibility to take into consideration of its national interest and its duty to protect its citizens. And also, Japanese government is a government with power, with third largest economy in the world. It has clear rationale and it has clear power to carry out a policy if it thinks that that fits their national interest. And the previous speaker, quote unquote, said, being rich doesn't mean you're being respected. Maybe that's true in a domestic country. However, that's not true in an international community, as you know, Mr. Speaker. In the international community, being rich does mean that you're respected, because every country takes into consideration of their trade, their economic power, their trade partners, Mr. Speaker. For example, the Japanese government is now opting out from the sanctions against DPRK, which is North Korea, and is actually aiding North Korea, which is actually clearly going against the international trend, clearly going against what the United States wants. However, nobody says anything to Japanese government, right, Mr. Speaker? Why? Because Japanese government is rich. They don't want to lose their largest trade partners. This is exactly why Japanese government, in this case as well, Mr. Speaker, also has the power and the right and the responsibility to do so. We're not saying that we should be a rogue state like North Korea or Iran. However, we're saying that we have the power to carry out what we think is right, what we think is prioritized, Mr. Speaker. And also the motion says that given the majority of the votes, and the opposition is now saying that this actually undermines the level of our principle. However, this is not a condition, but this is just explaining what the status quo is like, Mr. Speaker. As our Prime Minister said, there's a strong I am Kenji movement in Japan, like I am Charlie Hebdo movement in France. People are defending Kenji. Why is that? Because he was an innocent person, innocent journalist who went to the countries that are in conflict just to report what's happening in those countries. People know that he's innocent and he doesn't deserve to die. That is why the public sentiment against Japanese government, on Kenji instance, is very friendly towards Kenji, very pressuring the Japanese government to actually take action, take a step, and actually actively intervene in this case to save Kenji, who did not have any reason to die in the situation. So that being said, they talked about how international relations, like reputation, these things are so important in the international community because Japan is like a global leader or something. However, first of all, which country in the world actually prioritizes reputation in the global society, then their national interest, then their citizens, Mr. Speaker? This is first of all very flawed, and that reputation never becomes a priority when a country actually analyzes the cost and benefit coming from their international policy, Mr. Speaker. And also the reputation cannot be a reason to kill your citizens, to actually give up to actually throw away your responsibility, your duty to protect as a citizen. Our Prime Minister clearly told you how the government was first created just to protect citizens, because citizens needed a entity to protect them, to ensure the life of them. If they want to deny our premise that the government has the duty to protect its citizens, they should logically debunk this premise than just nitpicking that they're putting a condition, Mr. Speaker. And also, they talked about how ISIS will finally take over the world because it's their goal, and that Japan will boost out this goal of ISIS, and if Japan starts to negotiate, other countries will try to do the same thing, and the ISIS will finally take over the world. However, Mr. Speaker, this is first of all not true, because as the previous speaker, the leader of opposition, quote unquote, said, the goal of ISIS is to end the Western society, to end the prosperation of Western society, especially the United States. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? Because excluding those Western countries like the United States or some European countries, there isn't a country that is especially aggressive towards Islam and Muslims, Mr. Speaker. There is no country who has like extreme policies, extreme stance against Islam, who actually have negative sentiment towards Islam, who actually blocks them from achieving their goals, Mr. Speaker. That is exactly why ISIS is targeting the United States in the Western society, but not Japan, or not like Korea or something. That is also exactly why Japan doesn't have any incentive or whatsoever to care about this ISIS group in the first place. What they should care instead is their citizen, Kenji, in that region, being a hostage of ISIS, Mr. Speaker. That leads to our team's last argument about political threshold. Let me analyze the status quo first. First of all, as the motion clearly states, there's a majority of public votes for this policy, for negotiation of the Japanese government to save Kenji in the first place, Mr. Speaker. And also, as the Prime Minister and I'm continuously saying, there's a strong I Am Kenji movement, which was initiated by an artist, which is actually spreading throughout SNS, throughout like picketing and all the sources of media in Japan, like just like Charlie Hebdo in France. And also the general, because of the vote in I Am Kenji movement, there is a general public sentiment that innocent people shouldn't die, innocent Japanese should not die, and the government has a duty to protect innocent people from dying in like Turkey or Syria, being hostages by terrorist groups like ISIS, Mr. Speaker. This is exactly the situation that we're debating about. And what if, in this particular situation, Mr. Speaker, what if the Japanese government, like we, decide not to negotiate, not to take a firm stance like zero tolerance policy against terrorist groups, and just let this person who was threatened to be killed in this warning, Mr. Speaker. This will actually boost up the public anger towards the administration, the Shinzo Abe administration. And because they know that the United States was the biggest obstacle in saving Kenji, because they know that the US, the current superpower in the global community, is the one that is actually directly and indirectly forcing Japan and other countries not to negotiate, take a zero tolerance policy, take the same stance as we do, because people know it. The public sentiment against the United States will actually be very negative, Mr. Speaker. And then people will think that U.S. demands every government of the global community to follow their line of logic, follow their line so that they can achieve what they want to achieve by defeating ISIS, Mr. Speaker. Then what will happen? All the FTAs, all the trades, all the partnerships, all the U.S. friendly policies that Japan will have to take in the future, they will be blocked by public sentiment. They will be blocked by public votes, Mr. Speaker. So even if we follow the opposition's logic of international relations and reputation, we should still vote for the proposition. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, as a part of this human society, it's tragic that some certain people have been captured by these atrocious terrorist organizations. With that being said, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the government has something more, has a responsibility to make a harder choice. That's why exactly when public sentiment says that these certain killers need to be killed, they need to be castrated, why the government puts them into the legal procedures to give them a rightful, tested judgment. So with that being said, I have 3 questions. First, what is government duty? The Prime Minister gave one single line of logic. That is for the sake of the citizens. Now, our LO came up and clearly gave a relevant point. Then why are you doing this only under the majority support of the public? Now, the fact that it depends on public support, Mr. Speaker, proves to you that this is not a moral principle that is categorically done by the government. But moreover, the only response that came up by their second speaker was that, well, people have sentiment. There's a Kenji movement. But the thing is exactly as we see, if saving people are so important, then why should it be done only by the Kenji movement, Mr. Speaker? Because we see numerous about atrocious criminals, the public say, we need to kill him, we need to reactivate the death penalty. But it's the government's role to not follow public sentiment, but provide them a more logical sense of judgment, a better, more immediate judgment. So we give them the wit burden why this is their policy. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, The second question, which side saves more lives? Now, we agreed that it's good to save more lives. Obviously, we're human beings. The PM also gave a single line of logic. They said a person is dead, another person is going to die. So we have to save him. As Japan, he has a role to save the citizens. Now, we ask you, Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen, to look further, to take a step further. Now, firstly, we've shown you from our LO that the reason, if we do this, this provides money to the atrocious government of the IS state. So they use this money, what do? They go out and take more Japanese citizens, ask for more money, and more if they use it to kill people in Jordan and raid. We believe that for the international society, this is wrong. Secondly, they said that this committed terrorist actions, they asked for convicted terrorists to be released from Jordan. And they asked Japan to negotiate with Jordan because of that. This exactly proves that if they negotiate, this person from Jordan, convicted terrorist, goes out, who is possible committing more crimes. We believe that this fundamentally goes against the Japanese reputation, which I will clarify in my third question. Now, they gave a POI, and they asked, the response that came from us was that Japan is not a westernized government. So the IS does not have legitimacy over that. Well, the fact is, exactly, to engage in that, because firstly, Japan endorsed the UN stance. Their official stance was that they were going to help fight the IS. That's why they supported Jordan with all those money and all those indirect benefits. So this goes against, directly contradicts their stance. Secondly, because Japan is not the Western nations, exactly, the reason IS has moral legitimacy is because they are going against the Western nation, killing Western people. However, because they're killing people in Japan, what does this do? As I was saying in my argument, this will deter the moral legitimacy if Japanese people let these people go and make that sacrifice. But moreover, exactly the reason why they're capturing Japanese people is not because of these moral sentiments. It's because they want practical benefits, money, or these convicted criminals. Exactly, if Japan concedes to that, this brings up a message that it works. If you capture people from Japan and threaten to kill them, capture more and more people, then this will work and Japanese government will concede. What does this lead to? This fundamentally goes against the protection of lives that these people so said was important from the sense. That goes against their own logic. Last question, 3. What will happen to Japan as a sovereign nation? Which side will help them? Well, the PM said that our PM said that Japan has a big economy. They can do whatever they want. $2 billion doesn't matter. Well, firstly, okay, let's go to the status quo. Look at the yen exchange rates. Japan has a very unstable economy to a certain degree. But secondly, as our LO stated, even if they are rich, Mr. Speaker, that does not mean they're respected. Because Japanese people officially stated that they endorse United Nations stance that they're going to fight. That's why they supported your Jordan in the first place. Now, what image did that send? Firstly, they're violating the non-negotiation policy that the UN advocates. Secondly, they're trying to help the citizens from Jordan who committed a lot of crime and trying to free him and abdicate him. This goes against their stance that they're going to help Jordan, and this creates a detrimental for their image. Thirdly, the money that they use to support the Arab are going to be used not only to kill more Japanese people, but it's going to kill people in the Arabic nation area. This will lead to the Arabian nations going against Japanese. We believe that is fundamental. The only thing that they said was that, well, Japan is sovereign. They can put lives over their reputation. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, they're already dead, Mr. Speaker. Japan clearly showed that they put their reputation more over. Secondly, even with that being said, we've taken down their case that even if they do it, more people will die because of their policy. Then this goes against. So lastly, even if more people die, the only thing that more people are going to die, and secondly, their reputation is also going to be harmed. So their scenario falls in either circumstance. POI, go.
Japanese people if Japanese people see Kenji dying, would they dare to go there again?
Why would they dare to go to the IS, Mr. Speaker, again? Well, if they see Kenji dying, Mr. Speaker, again, why would they want to go to the IS nation? We believe that what's much more important here is not about them moving or anything, but the international society, as they said, saving more lives. If they see Kenji die, the Japanese people not only do it in their areas, Mr. Speaker, what do? They look at these journalists, they look at the other nations, and they even go and put scouts in other nations in Japan and Korea, Mr. Speaker. We believe that these things are fundamentally done, these things are fundamentally deter them. So let's go into argument. Now, arguments are how the deaths of these people can give a more deter the actual justification of the Islamic State. Now, tragic if these people die. However, in the genesis of the IS formation, firstly, it was supported by Arabic nations. They like the Caliphate state. They said the Western nations are coming in and they're pissing us off. So we support the IS. Then they killed a lot of people from other nations. This made them lose support. Jordan went against them. Iraq went against them. And the international society, and even Al-Qaeda said that their nations were too atrocious for them to endorse. We believe that if they go on, as they said, kill on things that are not from the Western nation, that people from third nations such as Japan, that this further deters the legitimacy of IS to go on and say we're going against the westernized countries. But moreover, Mr. Speaker, what did this do? If they end under their model, the international stance weakens. The international stance and global society need to go together to fight them weakens because Japan, who supported Jordan, is suddenly saying, yes, we'll give you money to fight Jordan, we'll give you the legitimacy for them to release him. Secondly, they said that it will give them more money again, more strengthful money, and give them another convicted terrorist to use against the Arabic nations. This makes it harder for the international society, as Barballo said, these trained troops go in and tackle them because they are more powerful. We will, in the end, our side saves more lives, and our side to protect the sovereignty of Japan and both the international society. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition successfully portrayed to us how terrible things are happening. But we as the Japanese government asks you, why do we care? Because we think that this is ultimately about our citizens. It is our citizens' lives. Even if one more US citizens die, we don't care. We think that Japanese citizens are the utmost priority in our case, and we don't need to care about international relations. We don't need to care about whatever international globe thinks, and it goes against their stance or whatnot. We think that it is the Japanese government that we have to care, and we have to go back towards the legitimacy of which they have very conveniently tried to dismiss by simply saying that it is not. We don't think so. So let's move on to my clashes. Number one clash, should government prioritize the lives of citizens? Secondly, is there in any relevant international relations and harms towards Japanese government? But before going on, let's clarify one thing. We think that even if there might be a harm in international relations, we are still going to prioritize Japanese citizens. My second clash will still prove to you that international relations harms is minimal, but even if it is big enough, we are still going to prioritize Japanese citizens, and I'm going to further elaborate why. No, sir. So let's first move on to my clashes about should government prioritize the lives of citizens. Our Prime Minister have already told you why this is very important, why government has the utmost priority, and how they have the social contract taken from the citizens. But they try to tell you, okay, then why are you only conducting in the condition of people generally agreeing?
Some things are more important than that.
No, sir. We think that number one, there is more that this public sentiment is true, that this is going to happen anyways. We tell you about the Kenji movement, how majority of people already agree. But let's now move on to my clashes and extend a little bit more about this. Number one, they told you how criticism of Japan is going to start and there's going to be economic harms or whatnot. Mr. Speaker, we think this is a lie. Why? Because we think that they told you how Japan is the second most donator of United Nations, which means that they are powerful enough. They are already dominating for the United Nations. If they pull out, we think that there is hardly something that these United Nations can operate. We tell you that they are big economies, and they're going to lose huge economic partners if they dare do anything, such as sanctions. And what do we mean by this? We have seen the example of Japanese government doing strange stuff, like they're recently trying to negotiate with DPRK. We saw Abe going to DPRK and really doing a public show. That goes against the Northeast Asians' stance. That goes against the sanctions that we are already doing. But we still condone it. We don't sanction Japan. We have seen that Japanese power is too big enough to do anything practical against them. And we think that this is not big enough. But still, if it is big enough, we think that it should be prioritized. But let's move on to more important things. Because they have told you that this is different. Because, okay, we have healthcare. We can allow healthcare because it's a mutual interest. We think that this is also a mutual interest because of the things that they have been nagging throughout the debate. This is a popular support. Let's read the motion. It says that given that there are major public vote in favor, we think that major public vote means that there is a mutual interest. Why is that? Because we tell you that democracy, when they're doing votes, doesn't require rationality. That it does not require anything that is humanitarian. And in that type of context, Mr. Speaker, we think that if people have voted, that means that they are not thinking about humanitarian rights, but they're only regarding their own interests, Mr. Speaker, their own things, their own sentiment, how they might feel. And we don't think that that is we don't think that the rationale behind it is important. The fact that the public has generally agreed to the point that things are happening right now and they don't want it means that there is a mutual interest in government doing that actions. That is why we think that it is legitimate. Yes.
The majority of the people in Japan thinks that distortion of history and also provoking comfort women in our dear nation, ally Korea, is legitimate. Are you going to do that?
Okay, because we're Korean, they're trying to make an emotional appeal. If they do so, they're already doing it, Mr. Speaker, and we don't say anything. And we do say anything because we are like Korean, but right now we're Japanese government, we're doing it, and we think that if majority supports that, we think that it is okay. And we don't know why they're suddenly coming up with this, because it's emotional appeal. So, Mr. Speaker, let's go back. We think that all the citizen can do based on that is based on their own interest, and we think this is a mutual interest, Mr. Speaker. That is why this can be justified. This is not very different from healthcare. Sit down, sir. So we think that government should prioritize their own citizens, and we have told you why this is not very different from what government is doing right now. So let's move on to my second clash. But we have already won the first clash, but let's still move on and tell you why international relations harm is still very minimal. Number one, they told you that it's like an entire globe is going to be threatened right now. We have two rebuttals. First of all, Mr. Speaker, does entire globe matters? Because we think that the only reason why nations operate is based on their own self-interest. The reason why United States is having an ally with Japan right now is also based on their own self-interest. And if all the nations is based on their self-interest, then we believe that their Japan government should also prioritize this. We think that the reason why US is most devoted in this combating ISIS, and the reason why they're criticizing all the nations that are doing these kind of stuff is also based on their self-interest, not based on like global happiness. It's because they are the direct receiver of the harms. Because ISIS hates McDonald's. Because ISIS hates MNC dominations. And they think it's the US that is causing that. And we think that in that type of context, it is very, very important that Japan should also prioritize their own self-interest, like US is doing right now. But secondly, we tell you that it is not about military intervention, Mr. Speaker. We think that it is not mutually exclusive. US is already like bombing people, and they are already in a full frontal war. And the fact that like DLO comes up to the podium, and the fact that ISIS is going to do like a full frontal war against them, we don't think that that is really happening, and we don't think that is possible because ISIS is not irrational, crazy people. You might seem crazy, but they also have like their own people to protect, their own like regime to protect. They're not going to go against a full frontal war against Japan or whatnot. But secondly, very cliche argument about slippery slope. 3 rebuttals. Number one, we told you that we are already banning this from the start. We are going to ban people from doing whatever humanitarian causes to go to Turkey, to go to ISIS, to go anywhere near that. But secondly, we think that people already have vigilance. The fact that they are participating in Kanji movement is the fact that they are already knowing, and there's an informed consent that ISIS is dangerous, that you might be beheaded. And we think that that is not going to lead to people suddenly roaming around Turkey saying that, okay, take me. But thirdly, Mr. Speaker, we think that like not all government is going to do this. If Japan opens this up and do negotiations, it's their own nations and their own will to prioritize whether it's like their own citizens that are going to prioritize. But after Japan, we're going to do this. That's not mutually exclusive. There are different stances, and we're going to allow Japan to do this as the Japanese government. Now, Mr. Speaker, we don't think that Japan should succumb to peer pressure. We do think that this motion should pass.
All right. So the principal stance of coming from all 3 speakers of team proposition, the most principal basic line of logic coming from them was that saving lives and saving your own citizens is such a fundamental, essential duty of any government, and of course the Japanese government. But the fundamental question we asked from the very start in today's debate is that if this duty of saving your citizens and negotiating with terrorists is such a fundamental duty, why does their policy depend upon public vote in the first place? If it is something that's essential, that any government should do in the first place, why are they going to do it only if the public agrees upon it? I think that principally, they had a very shaky principled stance in the first place, and thereby, that point about this essential life-saving manner doesn't really stand in the first place. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, their emotional appeal about how, our own citizens' lives is the most important, and self-interest is most important. We believe that this is a very elementary point, because on 2 levels. First of all, their point about how only saving those 2 lives is essential is quite short-sighted, because actually them trivializing the international standing of Japan is actually misleading. Because a nation's international standing, that's exactly what directly links to the people's welfare at the end of the day. So we first of all believe that that is something that is not trivial, but more importantly, their whip simply came up here and gave this, very hardcore stance about how self-interest is everything. But so the only self-interest benefit coming from team proposition today is saving 2 lives, right? So all of their drastic points about self-interest, the maximum benefit is saving 2 lives. But what we tell you today is that at the end of the day, self-interest is harmed under their model. Because if Japan starts to negotiate with terrorists and send that money, that is saying that we are willing to negotiate with those terrorists. So the ISIS will kidnap more Japanese people, kill more, ask for more money. So at the end of the day, the only maximum benefit coming from them saving 2 people is not actually standing, because at the end of the day, it will lead to more harm and more harm of self-interest for Japan, ladies and gentlemen. Take your seat, ma'am. So we think that principally they cannot prove these very essential points for them to take this debate home. But more importantly, more specifically, what does today's debate come down to? So 2 questions. First of all, principally, 3 questions. First of all, principally, should a governmental international relations decision depend on public referendum? Secondly, practically, which side saves more lives at the end of the day? And thirdly, about the self-interest hardcore point, about which side actually benefits Japan at the end of the day from the Japanese perspective.
Sir?
But take a seat, ma'am. But first of all, principally, why such a decision shouldn't be based on populism in the first place? Because, ladies and gentlemen, as I told you itself, it's quite interesting that their whole policy about how it's so ethical and responsible for a government to save all its people is quite shaky because it depends upon public referendum in the first place. But more importantly, we believe that depending on public referendum itself is quite dangerous and problematic in the first place. They talked about the Kenji movement, but why do we have representative democracy in the first place, like Japan? Because the people vote for their representatives, and they trust that certain decisions have to be made by the government filtering their public manners. Of course, individual and the people's referendum and opinions is important, but our representative democracies respect the opinion that the government should make the best decisions based upon the people's support.
Sir.
So thereby, simply distrusting that kind of system, we think that that is something coming from team proposition. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we're telling you that why this people's perspective can be wrong practically in the first place. Because emotionally, of course, people of our same nationality are having guns to their faces. Obviously, they'll be emotionally agitated and they want to save those people. But in the long run, ladies and gentlemen, as we move on to the second issue, main issue of today's debate, about the practicality, such kind of emotional appeals is actually false. Because in the long run, they're killing more people under their stance, ladies and gentlemen. Which leads us on to the second issue about the practicality. Which side saves more lives at the end of the day? Okay, so let's say that we principally agree that saving lives is important, protecting and upholding the value of life is very important. Well, the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, security and safety will be deteriorated under their model. Because the whip basically came into this podium and said that the ISIS is not irrational. They don't go on full front war. Ladies and gentlemen, we agree. The IS does not right now directly invade other nations. It doesn't bomb other nations. But that's not because they don't want to. The reason is, ladies and gentlemen, unlike they want you to believe, the ISIS is weak, ladies and gentlemen. The ISIS isn't powerful. Their soldiers, half the number of the soldiers of the Iraqi government, and they don't have the numbers or the economic capacity right now. It is a terrorist group in its incipient stages. They're starting their terrorist organizations right now. That's exactly why they're luring other citizens to come join their organization. They're kidnapping Japanese citizens for money, ladies and gentlemen. They don't have the economic capacity or the military capacity to invade other nations in the first place. However, under their model, when they're actually negotiating with those terrorists and giving them millions of dollars, we believe that where will that money be spent? We believe that that money will exactly be spent on using more violence, buying more weapons, and increasing their forces and increasing their terrorist actions, ladies and gentlemen. The reason ISIS is not bombing other nations is not because they're altruistic. It's because they don't have the capacity or the economic military ability right now. That's exactly why Iraqi nations are actually going to combat them in 4 weeks, ladies and gentlemen. But we believe that at the end of the day, they're supporting a terrorist organization economically, and they will use that for more violence and more violence upon citizens, even Japanese citizens, ladies and gentlemen. But more importantly, from the Japanese perspective, why this is so negative? Because, ladies and gentlemen, the very notion saying that you are going to negotiate with these terrorists itself sends a message that you are willing to give them something if they completely kidnap our citizens, ladies and gentlemen. So in the future, ISIS, they might be willing to kidnap more Japanese citizens, ask for more money, and ask for simply more retribution, ladies and gentlemen. This is a point simply not responded from team proposition, because at the end of the day, their only benefit was saving more lives, right? But at the end of the day, if we negotiate with ISIS, they will have the incentive to kidnap more Japanese people, and at the end of the day, we'll have more Japanese deaths, ladies and gentlemen. But the only benefit coming from team proposition, which was saving lives, that at the end doesn't stand in the first place, because at the end of the day, the ISIS will become stronger and have the incentive to kidnap more Japanese people and kill more people, ladies and gentlemen. But finally, about the hardcore Japanese interest point about how all nations should be egotistic. But on this point, ladies and gentlemen, they had a very elementary stance, because we don't think that a nation's stance is solely based upon the number of those two lives in the first place. Because we think that essentially having an inconsistent political stance is essentially dangerous for a nation. As my deputy leader of opposition said, the official stance of Japan is that they're going to willingly combat the ISIS. They have been sending economical aid towards the effort for Jordan for the effort against the ISIS. However, at the same time, instead of negotiating with that terrorist group itself, we think that that builds an inconsistent stance for the Japanese government. At the end of the day, we think that this weakened the international standing of Japan, which is something that is damaging for their overall nation's welfare at the end of the day. So we have to look at the greater good, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of the day, Japanese interest is maximized under our model. That is exactly why in the status quo, Japanese took the choice of letting those people die. So they gave this, emotional appeal about how it is such a treacherous, irresponsible, and unthinkable decision to, negotiate with those terrorists and let those people die. But interestingly, Japan already made that hard decision. And team opposition tells you today that we have to make that hard decision in order for long-term benefits that we provide to you to the table today. And that's exactly why you'll be signing opposition ballots.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are two reasons why the government fails to take this debate. First time, they have to read the news, even though it's a jury morning of a competition day. But also secondly, they got to study IR. And I'll tell you why. This is a coherent point that they should have recognized from the get-go of the debate. First time, why do you have to read the news? Now, we told you from the status quo that there is no reason why Japan has to debate this motion in the first place. The two hostages are dead. And if you really care for those people, then you shouldn't just anticipate more hostages and therefore I'm going to negotiate with ISIS. But if you really cared about the sentiment, then you should have actually actively supported against ISIS and tried to fight them instead of being a timid little girl trying to support them in more financial matters. But even apart from that, we told you, secondly, that their entire basis principle was also faulty. Because it's not the problem of whether it's practically possible because of weird Kenji or Benji movement, but it's the fact that you are leaving this as a possibility in the decision of the majority hand is the reason why your principal rule of government seems to not stand. Because if that was such a principal rule of government, it shouldn't be the decision of majority of some people, but it should have been an inherent right, as all governments do. Whether you like welfare or not, same kind of case. But also secondly, we told you this is also a harm to the Japanese government. Why was this the case? Because if you give them money, $2 billion, which ISIS asked for, then in this case, what is going to happen? They're going to actually have much more stronger arms. We told you this is detrimental and much more harmful for not only international society, because of Japanese government too, because of two reasons why. First time, who is actually going to be sent to reconstruct ISIS in the area and help people? Japanese United Nations peacekeeping force, Japanese money, and everything. It's also Japanese products and everything. We think that because of this, Japan is going to spend much more money in the future just because of that few sentimental feeling that is no longer a problem in the first place. But secondly, we told you that their policy was ineffective from the get-go. This made by me, leader of opposition, was kind of handsome, but I told you that this was important because their policy was irrelevant because they're not stopping Japanese going back to ISIS in the first place. Why? Because they said you need consent, but reporters and all reporters go into these areas with consent. There's a red light zone, so you have to concede in the first place. So we think that their policy does not deter Japanese reporters, Japanese people going back in. Meaning that the problem there, as we analyze continuously, that Japanese people are going to be more targeted by ISIS is very coherent and much more dangerous if you really care for those people. But was there any response? None. Second point, they also failed to understand the practical benefit of Japanese government regarding the international relation. Now, why did Japan, an island nation with only good electricity products, become such a strong nation? Because we were able to bring good and stable international relations with other nations, with trade and economics. But the problem is this: just because you're rich, when you start being BSing your own position and abusing it by just not reflecting the international obligations in the first place, they won't trust you anymore. They won't trust us anymore. We think they try to brush up the idea of Korea and like this as such a simple sentimental problem. But look at the current status quo. Abe is actively being criticized by American governments and American newspapers, for example, economists, saying that such attitude is simply not acceptable. We think this trend indicates that The reason why we think that Japan could have done much better if it actually continues its not double standard, which has been a strong argument presented by Deputy Leader of Opposition, but yet again, no response. Secondly, second point in this second point. Now, the Deputy Prime Minister acknowledged in this point that the United States of America is a very strong entity, right? And they really, really hate IS, right? But at the same time, this was very weird, because as much as Japan is important to US, to Japan, US is as much as important to contain and maintain its economic stability. Now, what happens if Japan starts giving bad influence and negative connotations to the United States of America? Will it be happy? And whose economy is gonna last longer? Is it gonna be the United States of America's economy, the first in the world, or is it gonna be Japanese economy? It's kind of clear, right? We already have the answer. So at the end of the day, don't be sentimental, because we also love the citizens. But first time, they're already dead. But also secondly, if you really care for the people, you shouldn't be so sentimental about this matter, but be hardcore. Stop the violence, stop ISIS, and learn the status quo. That is the lesson that we learned today, and that is the reason why Opposition takes this debate home. Thank you.
Mr. Madam Speaker, there are two reasons why the opposition can't win today's debate. First of all, they have to read the news a little bit more carefully. It says in the news that the person was threatened again, not killed. He was threatened again by the IS. He's still alive out there. We still have a responsibility to save him. But more importantly, secondly, they don't know what a government's about. We told you from the very beginning of the Prime Minister's speech that today's debate is about the perspective of a Japanese government. We told you it's not about like the entire society as a whole. It's not about the globe as a whole. It's about Japan and its citizens. What obligation does the Japan government have in its first priority? The security and the lives of its citizens. We clearly told you that in any case whatsoever, if their policies, if their directions harm your own citizens, they don't do it in the status quo, which is exactly why we have to propose today's motion. Now, we've seen throughout today's debate that the main thing that the opposition relied on two things: emotions and hollow harms. They constantly try to give you emotional appeal that people in Jordan are going to die, that people in the Western societies are going to die, that IS is going to build a huge army and take over the entire world, which we believe is a contradiction in the first place. When their LO came up and the first thing they said about the characterization of the IS is that it's weak and doesn't have a strong army in the first place. But secondly, we also believe that the harms that they describe itself are simply not true. Now their whip comes up and says that since these IS, they don't have it yet, but they will have it soon and will attack. We strongly doubt this fact in the first place. First of all, we think that the IS itself, no matter how much it gains, we don't think that it's something that's gonna be able to overcome Western democracies like the US, which has over 30 times stronger than the second country ranking in the military regime. That's why we strongly believe that even if the IS gets I don't know, a few $1 billion, it's not gonna affect anything, it's not gonna change. They have a bigger burden to prove if they really want to say that the IS is so harmful, which is, again, as we told you, contradicting the very first statement of the LO. But that's why we strongly believe that the opposition failed to prove their burden. Well, what was their burden? We think that their burden was mainly to prove why Japanese government, in any case, would prioritize their citizens less than the global society. Their burden was not to simply tell you that there are harms, that there might be harms, that IS might attack. Maybe if that's true, let's say that all that is true, you still have to prove why the Japanese government would then prioritize their citizens less over the citizens of the globe, over the citizens of Jordan. Why would Japanese government love the people of Jordan more than their own citizens? This is the burden, this is the comparison that they had to give us today. But since they didn't, we think that they failed to do the burden. Well, then what did we do to you as government? We think that we clearly gave you, first of all, we clearly stated to you through our model that we're not only simply negotiating, we also told you that we're banning any source of access with these terrorist regimes and terrorist groups, so that none of this will happen within the future, so on and so forth, with which clearly the whip speaker and all three speakers clearly misdirected the debate. But more importantly, we also told you a lot of other things. First of all, we told you the very fundamental principle, how a government is supposed to be something that cares and prioritizes their own citizens. We also told you that the reason why the current situation is so legitimate is because we do have mutual interest. Now, the only differentiation that the opposition was able to make today between welfare and this situation was about mutual interest, that welfare has it, this doesn't. But currently, as it states in the motion, and as we stated through our arguments, we do have mutual interest. We do have such strong political will. We do have things like I am Kenji. We think that we do have mutual interest. Then, following their logic, we think that our stance is perfectly legitimate. We also told you how international relations are not harmed and not threatened. We told you clearly how Japan is not something that US and other countries simply throw away because of this situation, the status quo. That's why it won't be that harmed. We also told you how rather doing such things will harm the political threshold of these countries in status quo, which they didn't touch upon at all in any engagement whatsoever. So, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we think we clearly told you what the burden of both sides of the House had, what they had to prove in order to win this debate, and we strongly see that the government has taken this debate.
I thank both teams for the wonderful debate. The debate has ended. Both teams can now cross the floor, shake hands, and thank you for everyone.